Xtalks is the industry leader in connecting life science, food, healthcare, and medical device professionals. The Xtalks Life Science podcast features insightful conversations with industry experts about all things pharma, biotech, and more.
Hello and welcome to the Xtalks Life Science Podcast. I'm Ayesha Rashid, Senior Life Science Journalist at Xtalks.com. And this week, I'm happy to introduce two very special guests on the show. We have with us today Dr. Alessio Travaglia, a neuroscientist and Director of Neuroscience at the Foundation for the National Institutes of Health, or FNIH, and who also manages the new AMP ALS program at the Foundation. We also have with us Dr. Nadia Sethi, who is a dentist by training and an ALS patient advocate who also formerly served as Director of Community Outreach and Engagement at the ALS Therapy Development Institute. Both Dr. Travaglia and Dr. Sethi will be speaking with us today about the new AMP ALS research program that the FNIH launched last month from both a therapeutic development and ALS patient community perspective. So to learn more about the FNIH's new AMP ALS program, let's turn to Dr. Travaglia and Dr. Sethi. Thank you both for being on the show today.
Thank you for inviting us. Pleasure to be here.
So glad to be here.
Thank you. And so I'd like to start by asking the both of you, really to back up a bit before we talk about the really exciting new program, the AMP ALS program at FNIH. I'd like to learn more about both your personal and professional journeys in the space of neuroscience and specifically in the space of ALS. So perhaps we can begin with you, Dr. Sethi, in terms of what has and what keeps inspiring you to work in the field. And again, this question is for the both of you.
Yeah, so ALS entered my life in 2019 when my husband was diagnosed. He was 44 years old when his symptoms started, and we lost him 20 months from his first symptom. And it was for me and my husband, both of us coming from a healthcare background. In 2019, it was really shocking to land in ALS and to see how little there was in the way of treatments. And so it really became a mission for me to try to do something about that. And I remember going through, I think the first half of ALS was rather slow for my husband, but then it really, really sped up. And as it was going very rapidly in 2020 and during a pandemic, I think I told myself every day that, this is not okay. Nobody should have to live like this. And that's kind of what keeps me going in the ALS space. That's why I'm still here today. And I'm really excited for this initiative that we're talking about today.
I'm so sorry to hear about your loss, Dr. Sethi. That definitely... thank you for sharing that personal story with us. And I think it really puts into perspective for a lot of us and in and outside of the ALS community. So thank you so much for sharing that. And Dr. Travaglia?
Thanks for the question. I'm a neuroscientist by training, and I spent the first part of my career working on Alzheimer's disease. Pretty much, though, I realized that we should break the silos of disease. It's not about Alzheimer, Parkinson, ALS, you name it, but it's the biology that is in common, especially when we have so much and we can learn from one area to the other, and there is so much in common in terms of the biology. I start thinking about ALS, and I was inspired by all the work that the ALS community is doing. We are building such a strong momentum that I would say started with the Ice Bucket Challenge several years ago. And then there was the Act for ALS, now this is ALS initiative. And now it's time that we're working all together on ALS. And I think the impact that we're going to do is going to be incredible.
And can you tell us a bit more about ALS, the disease, and also what some of the most significant unmet needs are presently?
Nadia, you want to start?
Sure, I can start. So, I mean, to me, having gone through the disease, I think all of the needs are unmet. I really do. There's there are struggles with care, there are struggles with treatment, all of it. There are really good things that are happening to change that. Um, but yes, there's a lot of things that need working on in ALS. It was a challenge, I think, for us, especially with rapidly progressing disease, to have equipment ready, to adapt to all of the changes that came rapidly. We would adjust to one change. In ALS, there's loss of motor function, and in really any part of your body that you can move voluntarily, that is probably going to go away at some point. And so adjusting to all of those losses is really, really tough. And so for us, that was a really difficult thing to do. For slower progressors, it's a little bit different, right? They have a little more time to adjust, but then they are adjusting for a long period of time. So the care definitely needs some work. We are very lucky to have multidisciplinary clinics in ALS now, and to have one source to address many of our needs. But there's still so much more to be done. As far as treatments go, we have come a long way in the last few years. We have had some new treatments come out, which is wonderful. But we need good treatments for all. And so, initiatives like this are critical in driving that forward. And as Alessio was saying, in breaking down those silos and bringing all these different parties together.
Thanks, Nadia. And I want to add a couple of things. ALS is a terrible disease. It's considered a rare disease, I would say, just because there is no survivor, because symptoms progress so fast, and we don't have time to build a community. Now, finally, we are doing that. People with ALS and caregivers and people with experienced family members, caregiver, are working all together. And that's amazing. Now, from my perspective and what we've seen at the FNIH is that we desperately need biomarkers for this disease. We're talking about a rapidly progressive disease, and typically patient takes between 12 and 18 months to get diagnosed. And then after that, there's not much time because the disease progresses so quickly. So especially for a disease like ALS, this is moving so quickly, we need the biomarkers to identify patients early.
And so, speaking more about the new AMP ALS initiative at FNIH, how will this specific program address both some of the things that you were talking about, Dr. Travaglia, in terms of research and development, therapeutics, which includes research into new biomarkers, and then also tying that into the patient perspective and the patient journey?
At the FNIH, or Foundation for the National Institutes of Health, we believe that science has the power to cure, but there is no single organization that can do this alone. So we build together consortia and we bring together the brightest mind working on a specific area. So in this case, in ALS, we work with 12 organizations plus NINDS plus FDA. And all together with all these scientists, we came up with some priorities, things that we should address sooner rather than later. The first priority that we identified is that the ALS field is very fractured. There are multiple foundations. Each foundation is doing an amazing work. There are multiple databases as well. And for a researcher working in pharma as well as in academia, it's challenging to analyze data in database A and then comparing the data in database B and then C. It's a lot of time that could be used otherwise. And so the first thing that we're going to do is to bring together all this data and develop the ALS knowledge platform. This is going to be a one shop where a researcher can go and analyze all the data that are out there. The other things that came up is that we desperately need biomarkers, as Nadia and I mentioned before. We need biomarkers to identify patients early. We also need biomarkers to track disease progression, as well as to evaluate the efficacy of a specific drug. That's the other second big aim that we're going to accomplish through this research plan. The other thing that we discuss is how we don't really have clinical outcome assessment for ALS, meaning we do have, and it's used since many years, but it needs to be updated. We need to hear the voice of people who live experience, and we need to make changes in this COA. And this is the work that is going to be done through AMP ALS together with the Critical Path and the FDA that are taking the lead in this piece of work. And I would say that people who live experience are going to be critical for this piece, for the biomarker piece, and all the work that we are doing.
And Dr. Sethi, what's your perspective on this new initiative, and how do you think it's going to really bring together key stakeholders, which we'll talk a bit more about, but one of the key stakeholders being the patient community?
Yeah, I think this is one of the things that was critically needed in ALS, right? To bring all of these parties together, to bring the FDA and NIH and biopharma and ALS nonprofits that are focused on research and care and advocacy. Everybody's coming together, right? We did not have that even 5 years ago when I entered ALS world, and the fact that it's happening is wonderful. And it's not really something that I imagined could happen in an easy way. There's, the research community can go on in their silos and continue to do their work independently of each other. But the fact that everyone is coming together to do this kind of shows that there is a larger, bigger picture in mind, right? And that's one of the things that's really been missing in ALS. And we're very fortunate. Now is the time to do this. And so that's one of the things I'm just very glad to see that this is moving forward.
And so as an initiative that is a public-private partnership, essentially, who are the key stakeholders? And I think you did mention some of them, both Dr. Travaglia and Dr. Sethi, and what are you looking for from these key stakeholders in terms of what should and what can these parties bring to the table for a fruitful collaboration?
I think that this is the time, because we have really all the stakeholders. There's such a brain power around the table. And this is really important when we don't really want to waste time. We want to focus, and we don't want to reinvent the wheel. And having everybody around the table to discuss together is extremely helpful for that. And I would say that in this initiative, a critical role is played by people who live experience, and is extremely helpful, because those are the people that can say, like, you want to do X? No, just focus on Y, because this is what we want to do. Or they say, you want to do this clinical trial with this, you want me to come to the office every day, you want to do this kind of measurement. This is not in line with what we want to do. And this is extremely important. Saves a lot of time, it saves resources and energy, and it's good to build trust in science as well.
Yeah, and I'd love to add to that. So yeah, the ALS clinicians are experts in care. The researchers are experts in the science. The patient and caregiver community were experts in living with the disease, right? So it's hard sometimes, I think, for the research community to understand the day-to-day challenges and experiences that we faced. And those are the things that will drive things like clinical outcome assessments, right? We know what it was like to deal with those losses of function that happened in our homes, right? And so we're well placed to give feedback on whether something is doable as an outcome assessment, for example, and whether we think it's really going to measure changes in the disease in a more sensitive way. So that's maybe just one example, but I think the patient voice is critical in all of this, but all of the parties are critical in all of this. I think bringing all of these different types of expertise together is what's going to make this successful.
And when we start speaking about trials for different drugs, ALS trials, they're complex and challenging as it is in terms of the science and the patient populations that you're trying to bring together in a study. In terms of patient engagement and retention, it's a big topic in any clinical trial in any field. For ALS specifically, what are the challenges in trial participation from a patient engagement and retention perspective?
I can start. The first thing is to enroll patients, and having such a good patient community working on the table certainly is helping in that. We really want to avoid competitions with the other study. We want to be everybody aware of what's going on and making an informed decision about what we're doing. And at the FNIH, we are creating a patient ambassador initiative as well, so that we have patients sharing their experience and helping each other as well. I don't know, Nadia, if you want to elaborate more on this point, as well as the retention of patients in clinical trials.
Yeah, I think in the last 5 years, I've spent a lot of time in some of the initiatives that I've worked on connecting patients with biopharma to provide feedback on clinical trials. And also I've developed two tools to help people find information on clinical trials. And so I think one of the key things that we hear from the patient community is that they don't always hear information about research. And so that's one of the pieces. Another thing is to really, what Alessio and I were talking about earlier, is incorporating that patient feedback into trial designs, so that we have trials that people want to participate in, that are, as trials are burdensome to be a part of, right? But we need them to advance the research. And so how do we create trials that are as patient-centric as they can be? That's a big question. And I think the other key piece is just education and communication, right? And not to the patient community, to the science community alike. Everyone needs some education on why this matters, what it's like to participate in a trial, the potential burdens that are associated with that. As the disease progresses, it gets harder and harder to leave the house. Even in ALS, it becomes really, really challenging. And so are we able to bring remote measures to, into the patient's home? Are we able to collect data remotely? Those things are going to be key in moving all of these. And we're now in a place, for so many reasons, because the research has advanced because of the pandemic that taught us so much about what can be done remotely. We're in a good place for all, and also the awareness that was generated by the Ice Bucket Challenge that has led to a lot of these initiatives, and the advocacy that pushed in the last several years. It's all coming together, hopefully in a good way to move these things forward.
And so I think you touched on some of these things, Dr. Sethi, but in terms of effective patient advocacy and effective patient engagement, what are the keys to that? You did mention that one of the things that you hear from the ALS community is that they're not able to access information and education. So what are some of the things that can be done in areas like that to improve access and to improve awareness and participation?
I think that's a really important question. And yeah, I think it really involves going out into the communities in different ways to spread the word, whether it's on the ground or virtually or through social media. We really need, there is so much outreach in all of those ways. But I think in this case, more is better. And so I'm hoping that that's something that really just continues. But to get people, I feel that we are all better off if everyone has a little bit of understanding about the science and how clinical research works, and how the entire overall research process works, even before the clinical part, right? And so I'm really hoping that we're going to have more educational initiatives moving forward to kind of spread the word about how this works and why that matters.
And Dr. Travaglia, in your experience, how have you found over the years, how things have potentially evolved with respect to better disseminating information to patients and clinicians alike?
Most importantly, I would say there is such a, how to say, momentum in ALS research. And until a few years ago, people didn't really know about ALS. There was a little bit Lou Gehrig disease, that of course is the other name how ALS is known. And people thought like, well, it's a rare disease. It's not gonna happen to me or anybody that I know. We're talking about the disease that affects 1 in 400 or 500 people in the US. So it's relatively common. And because of the Ice Bucket Challenge, because of the Act for ALS, there is such a sense of this is important. Even the federal funding and resources allocated for ALS, it was absolutely impossible to think that something like this was going to happen. So all this is very exciting. This is the time. We have the right people, we have the right resources, there is awareness, people live experience around the table. So this is the opportunity.
And a big component is the patient and also the caregivers, right? They often get lumped together with the patients, but their journeys in of themselves are unique. And I think to tap into that, those experiences, that information, I think that's also very that's a key component as well, as you can attest to, Dr. Sethi.
Yeah, I think we've done a really good job with this initiative and with many of the other ones that have come up recently, and including patients and caregivers and also asymptomatic gene carriers. And we each bring a slightly different perspective. I always encourage when I'm talking with pharma companies and stuff that you want to have these diverse perspectives because we all see things differently. Even a person with ALS who has fast progressing disease versus slow progressing disease and their caregivers are all going to have different experiences, right? And all of those experiences are still ALS, but we don't get to hear them if we only talk to one person. So bringing many people together who have lived experience is really important. And here's the thing, my husband progressed so rapidly that while he was involved in a few advocacy initiatives, it was really impossible for him to be very actively involved because he was going through so much, right? And so if I wasn't here speaking on his behalf, his experience would be lost. And so I'm really just honored and glad to be able to carry his voice forward because he's not here to do it.
And we're so happy and grateful that you are doing that because that's such a valuable piece. Invaluable, I would say. So thank you so much for that. And both of you mentioned the Ice Bucket Challenge, which it's been 10 years, apparently. It's the 10-year anniversary of that huge campaign. And Dr. Travaglia, you were saying it was unimaginable that you could see so much momentum being built from something like that, where ALS was, put on the world stage, essentially. And so how do you both see that momentum currently? And is that continuing? We've seen a lot of great initiatives come out of that. We've seen companies, we've seen getting drug approvals and just the research having been propelled so far. So what is the current landscape of that type of awareness or those types of campaigns, and how do you see things moving forward into the future?
The fact that now we're talking about an AMP for ALS is the result of the fact that there is momentum, there is so much energy around this area. 10 years ago, when the AMP started, the first AMP in the neuroscience space was focused on Alzheimer's disease. Second one was Parkinson, then schizophrenia. ALS was not in the radar, was not something that there was enough interest from pharmaceutical companies and government as well. And so for me, the fact that now we have an AMP for ALS is kind of like the result of all the momentum that we're building. And the fact that we have so many partners working together with us is the outcome of this momentum.
Yeah, and maybe just to build on that a little bit, it brought so much needed attention to this disease, right? And funding, and that did good things. And I think from there, hopefully, it's a domino effect, and it feels like it is, right? Because here we are bringing together um, public. We're doing this public-private partnership, just like Alessio was saying, right? I mean, these are things that we did not imagine were going to happen 5 years ago, and so to be here, I think is partly in large part because of the Ice Bucket Challenge. There are many nonprofits that are honoring the Ice Bucket Challenge this year because of the 10-year anniversary in different ways, which is wonderful. But it really kind of got the ball rolling on many of these other initiatives that have followed.
And so in terms of steps and milestones for this new AMP ALS program, what can we anticipate to see coming in the first several months and first several years of the initiative? What are the core areas of focus?
Yeah, so this is a 5-year initiative, and in year 1, we expected to have the AMP ALS knowledge platform to put together with the first 10 data sets. And the other one will come at a pace of approximately 10 database per year. That's the first big milestone that we have in mind. Now, the work on biomarkers is going to happen from the beginning, focusing on existing biospecimens. And then we have, together with the NINDS, or the National Institute of Neurological Disorders and Strokes, we are focusing on the ALS study. That is a natural history study that is going to enroll over 2,000 people. And over time, we're collecting biospecimens to do additional biomarker work. That's going to happen. The enrollment actually is going to start very soon, the next couple of weeks. And then we expect to have a patient fully enrolled in the next 3 years, and then focus on the biomarker research later on. So we have a busy agenda. Is a very we expect a lot out of this initiative, but working all together, we think that we are going to do it.
Indeed, and looking forward to all of those milestones, and it's such a great initiative indeed, and I think it really, like the both of you were mentioning, how it really culminates all of the advocacy and all of the research and all of the momentum that we've seen in the last several years. So absolutely, it's a tremendous initiative, and I'm so happy that you both were able to share your perspectives and the work that you're doing as part of that. So thank you so much. Any final comments or before we wrap up?
I really want to thank each and every partner that we have working with us for this initiative, especially people who live experience. And a special thanks goes to the co-chair of the initiative, Steph Fredette from Biogen, Emily Gubitz from the NINDS, and Dan Doctorow from Target ALS, and also person living with ALS.
And I'm just incredibly grateful for all of the advocates that pushed for this effort in the last several years, and to all of those, I have lost so many friends in the last several years that I've gotten to know because of ALS, and in honor of them, we still carry the torch forward for them, but their feedback and experiences are so important in driving this ahead. And I'm so glad that this is all happening.
Thank you, Dr. Travaglia and Dr. Sethi, for sharing your perspectives and for the amazing, incredible work that you have done and are continuing to do in this space. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, that's the end of this episode of the Xtalks Life Science Podcast. If you liked today's show, don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe. Thank you, everyone, and we'll see you next time. Bye for now.
To join the Xtalks community, visit xtalks.com and register for exclusive access to curated content like live webinars, news articles, and educational videos. The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the speakers sharing them and should not be taken as professional advice, nor do they necessarily reflect the policy or position of Honeycomb Worldwide. For further information, email us at podcast@xtalks.com.